I'm going to share 8 top tips to help you create ambient music chords. Now, of course, you can use any chord in ambient music, depending on the genre and the effect you are going for. In this video, the vibe we are going for is what most people probably considered ambient music to be back in the 70s when Brian Eno initially coined the term. Relaxation, a bit floating, a bit ambiguous perhaps. Now, a lot of ambient music actually only contains one chord with arpeggios and sequences and a bit of improvisation over the top. So in these tips I will show you how you can create variations of a single chord tone if you want to create a bit of variety while still maintaining a single basic chord tone. I also show you how you can use these basic ideas to create harmonic progressions, chord progressions, while still maintaining this level of ambiguity and a sense of floating. It will be beneficial if you have a little music theory and know how to form chords. But if you are a little flaky on the subject, I'll explain exactly what I'm doing as I'm doing it, so hopefully you will be able to follow along. Although this is not in any way a primer on chords. If that sounds good, let's get into it. So I'm going to use Vital for this, mainly because it's free and it's a wavetable synth and it produces nice pad sounds. Now I have actually increased the attack on this sound just so you don't have to wait 10 minutes for the sound to fade in, but in reality it would have a much slower attack, but the body and the release are exactly the same. It's just to give you a flavour of how these chord changes will affect a pad sound. And I've put this neat little keyboard on the bottom. I think it's going to be easier for you to see which keys I'm pressing by looking at this. The keys show up in blue and you see the note names above the keys, and I think this will be easier than trying to look at me playing the keyboard where my fingers get in the way. Right, let's get going. So the first thing I want to talk about is chord voicing, just a very simple tip which most of you will be familiar with, but just in case you are not, if you know how to form a chord, you know the chord C is formed from the notes C, E and G. But you don't have to play them in root position. You can play these 3 notes anywhere on the keyboard and it will still produce the chord of C. So in music theory terms, if you played E, G and C, that is still a C chord. Technically that's known as the first inversion. We're not going to get too deep into that. Well, that's all there is to it. If we played G, C and E, that's still the chord of C in second inversion, but we could also play a C down here, and we could play a G up here. I'm going to run out of fingers, and we could play an E up here. So that is still the chord of C. No matter where you play the notes on the keyboard, if you play those 3 notes, they form the chord of C. So one little tip, the first tip, if you like, is the lower down the keyboard or the lower the frequencies of the notes in the chord, the further apart they should be. Here's a quick example. Here's a chord of C, played fairly high up. I'm going to change to a minor just by flattening the 3rd. And you can definitely hear that. Major, minor, no problem at all. Let's play the C chord down the bottom here. Now, I'm listening to that, I'm not 100% sure if that is I don't know what it is. Is that a major chord? It's very muddy, so let's just play a minor version. Ooh, you can just hear the minor. Major, minor, you can just hear that kicking in, but that's because we know what the chord is. So the further down you are, the further apart the notes should be. So that's the first tip, and we'll sort of use this as we go through the chords. So for the second tip, we're going to look at a chord which you probably would not associate with ambient music. That is the power chord. The power chord is simply a chord with the 3rd removed. So in the case of C, it would be C and G. And you can spread these notes out across the keyboard. And what does that sound like? Is that a C major? Is that a C minor? Well, it's neither. We don't know what it is because it has not got a third in it. Now, it doesn't sound powerful as such played on with a pad sound, but the point is it's very ambiguous. It creates a floating type of I don't know where I am or what I'm doing type of effect. Which is ideal for ambient music. We want to create a floating type of sound. Tip number 2, instead of playing a full chord, if you are playing chord progressions, instead of playing a full chord, try playing a power chord and see if that gives a more open sense of space. Right, next we'll have a look at suspended chords. Now, there are 2 types of suspended chords. One of them, the second one we look at, is very interesting indeed. But let's look at the first one, which is the most common, and that is the sus4. So a suspended chord suspends the third, so the major or the minor third, and it raises it to the fourth. So in the key of C, we remove the third and play the fourth. So that is the C sus4. Now, typically in music notation, it would just be written as C sus. It is assumed that if you are suspending a chord, you're going to suspend the fourth. So that would be C sus. However, there is also a C sus2. We get onto that in a second. Now, again, we can play this fairly high up the keyboard in a very closed position. But we can also, as we discussed in the first tip, we can also spread those notes out. So they consist of a C, an F and a G. So we could play them in that position. And that gives an even more open sound because the notes are not so close together. Now just listen to that for a second. What chord is that? Well, you know what chord it is. What is your ears saying? Well, if you have good ears, you can probably tell that that is a suspended chord, but it is obviously neither a major chord nor a minor chord. So we have this sense of hovering about, of ambiguity, again, which is ideal for ambient music. Now, tip, if you like it, are we on to number 4? So the next tip would be if you really want to anchor the tonality of a chord, which is not voiced, shall we say, in the root position, like this. You can do this by playing the root as the lowest note. So if we play this, that definitely roots this chord in the key of C. This is a C sus chord. And we'll use this a little bit later. So our ears pick up on the lowest note to give us more information about the actual chord which is being used. One of the things which in general you want to avoid in ambient music is chords which demand a resolution, and the sus4 chord, it actually does demand a resolution if you just play it, shall we say, out of context. So if you play this chord and hold it for a few bars, then the ear gets used to the fact that it is, well, it's not going anywhere, or at least it's not going anywhere in a hurry. But this definitely wants to resolve to, yes, it wants to resolve to the third. That sounds final and complete. Now, that's probably not something you would want to do in ambient music. You could make that the last chord of your ambient piece. So if someone's meditating or relaxing or whatever, they know, right, that's it. That's finished. That's the end. And you will have heard this cadence, as it's called, hundreds, thousands of times. Let me just find a better sound to use for this. So, how many times have you heard this? Wonderful, probably thousands of times. So the suspended fourth desperately wants to resolve to its major or possibly minor But in ambient music, we don't want to do that. We want to give it a sense of hovering, of going nowhere, of just being a little bit ambiguous, maybe a little bit mysterious. Now, if you're curious about where the term suspended comes from, it comes from music theory. Of course it does. All these weird terms come from music theory. Contrapuntal writing, when a note from the previous chord would be held over or suspended, it wouldn't be resolved immediately into the following chord. So here's a very quick example. If we want to move from C up to F, instead of moving directly like that, we could move the E up to the F, but we could suspend the movement of the G up to the A until the second chord, the F, had been realized. So like this. So we'll move the E up to the F. There's a suspension, and that's resolved. That creates a really nice effect, and you can use this in any sort of music, really, just to create a really smooth and interesting transition. It's often used in orchestral writing. Anyway, that's where the suspended term comes from. Let's get back to it. The next one is the suspended second, and as its name suggests, instead of suspending the third up to the fourth, we suspend it down to the second. So this is C sus 2. And again, that has a very suspended fourth feel about it. And is there a reason for that? Well, let's look at the chord. Are you looking at the chords? So they are, well, C, D and G. What happens if we rearrange them? Let's put the G at the bottom. So what is that? Oh dear. It is a G sus 4. There's G. There's the sus 4. So this second is really interesting note when used with, well, anything really, but particularly with ambient, because it gives us a boatload of different choices, a number of different things that we can do with it. Now, as mentioned earlier on, if we want to root the particular key, the particular chord, we can do so by playing the root note. So let's play the C sus 2 in what might be typically considered the root position. Now, as we've seen, this could be a C sus 2, but it could also be a G sus 4. So what is it? Well, as the C is the lowest note, we may think it's more likely to be a C. You need very good ears to tell the difference between all these different sounds. But if we want to make absolutely sure, we can plonk a C down here somewhere. So this is a C chord of some description. Now, without changing the upper notes, what if we play a G in the lower register? We have sort of miraculously transformed the C sus 2 into a G sus 4 simply by changing the root note. Now, whether or not you can actually tell the difference, I don't know. My ears, I'd be absolutely honest, I do not have the best ears in the world for all that I have been a professional musician. But it does provide a different set of tones for the listener. So there is definitely a change in tone. So this is one of the things which we want to do in ambient. We want to create varying sounds, but without varying them too much. So this is a really interesting note, the ninth. Here's another thing you can do with the ninth. So you probably know you create chords and extended chords. Yes, we're getting into serious waters here by stacking thirds on top of each other. So there's the C, there's a third, there's another third, there's another third. And these four notes together make up the C major 7th chord. Now, I tend to think of this as a soft major chord. I think it's pretty much definitely major, at least when played in this configuration. But the addition of the B of the major 7th note, it gives it a sort of jazzy feel. These chords are used a lot in hip hop and chill step, future garage stuff like that. You can of course use these in ambient music too. It provides a nice wash of sound, but it's not, at least in my opinion, particularly ambiguous. So if you want ambiguous, maybe this is not the best chord to use. However, if we add another third, then we get the ninth. Just letting that play so your ears get used to it. So it's a bit of a wash of sounds. Is this major or minor? It's a little bit difficult to tell, and well, perhaps not surprisingly, because it contains a G chord. It also contains an E minor chord, and it also contains an E minor sixth, as well as a C and the C major seventh. So it's a combination, of course. It can sound really nice if you spread the notes out around the keyboard. That might be an excellent way to create a variation on a C. However, let's remove one of the notes. Let's remove the major seventh. So in effect what we have is a C chord with an added ninth. Now, definitely for ambient music, this would be my preferred chord. It's ambient, it's a little bit ambiguous, a little bit mysterious, it's a little bit sad. We are playing a major chord, but this just gives it that sort of question mark over the tonality. Now, I made another video about actually the minor 9 chord, which I'll play in a second. You might want to check that out. Well, do check it out. Please check it out. I think the minor add 9 chord is one of the most poignant chords in all of chordland. Here's an example. Now, I wanted to keep everything in the key of C, well, just using the white notes, that is, for the sake of simplicity. But let's convert this C major add 9 to a C minor add 9. I think that is an absolutely wonderful sound. Very sad. I think it's a very sad sound. So if we were going to play this in the key of, well, C major, A minor, we would play the A minor chord and add a ninth. Oh, this to me just expresses longing. Oh, where does it want to go? It could go up. It could come down. It's desperate to go somewhere. So I think the adding a ninth note to a chord can just create so many possibilities. Right, so we've looked at lots of chord variations, or variations of the same general chord type, variations of the C chord. So many ambient pieces simply consist of one chord, which might go on for minutes and minutes, with arpeggiated bass lines, arpeggiated top lines, middle lines, and so on, over and under the basic chord, and perhaps with a little improvisation over the top of that. So you only need the one chord. But even if the chord is evolving, this has an evolving sense that you can see it on the screen. Something's moving, something's happening. It's not absolutely static, but even just holding this chord, even if it's in the background for several minutes, could become a little bit boring for the listener. I'm sure your music isn't boring, but listening to the same sound over and over, I think, can be a little bit tiring sometimes for the listener's ears. So what we can do is use some of the variations of the chords which we've seen here. And we can actually vary the chord without changing the notes. How do we do that? Well, let's go back to our friend C sus4. So we're playing the C in the bass, so yes, this is telling our ears, hopefully, that this is a C chord. But the other notes we have in the chord, we have a G and an F, so we could also play a G or an F in the bass. Is that still a C sus4? Yeah, it sort of probably is a C sus4 with a G in the bass, C sus4 stroke G. And we could put an F in the bass. So these are quite pronounced. Now the general tone of the chord hasn't changed, we're just changing the bass note. So if you really wanted a single chord to last for an entire piece, you could vary the bass notes in this way. However, if we use a sus2, for example, so we play a C sus2 in this inversion and play a low C note, just so our ears know this is a C sus2 and not, well, what else could it be? Well, it could be a G sus4. So if we alternate between the C in the bass and a G, we still have the same tonality, but we are messing with the tonal center a little bit. So it just gives us more opportunities for varying the basic overall sound using ambiguous chords like this. So finally, let us assume that you actually do want chord changes in your music, and let us assume, for the sake of argument, you want to use the axis chord progression, which is what's this, 1 5 6 4. So in the key of C it would be C, G, A minor, and F. Now, this is a chord progression. I think it was probably made famous by the Axis of Awesomeness. I shall leave a link to their video down in the description. But this chord sequence, and certainly these 4 chords, have been used in probably hundreds of thousands of songs. It's a very popular chord progression. Now, it doesn't mean to say it's a bad chord progression. It depends on how you treat it, what melody you put over the top of it, the bass, and so on and so on. And you probably wouldn't want to use this in an ambient piece of music, but there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't. You are not going to play, I would imagine, you are not going to play 1 chord per bar. Because that's not ambient music. But let's just say, for the sake of example and illustration, because I'm trying to keep everything in the key of C using all the white notes, bring. Let us say, for the sake of example, that you wanted to use those chords. So instead of using those actual chords, the major chords and the A minor chord, you could use variations. You could use suspended chords, suspended fourths, suspended seconds. You could use major ninths. You could use power chords. So let's have a quick look at how that might work. So let's start with the C. Well, let's use our friend C sus4. So the next chord we would want would be a G. So what can we do for that? Well, we could go from the C sus4 to a C sus2, which, as we know, is the same virtually as a G sus4. So if we move this down to the D, we're still on the C in the bass, so this is a C sus2. And then if we move the bass up to a G, we have a variation on a G chord. So where do we go from here? Well, we're going to go to A minor, and what could we do with an A minor? Well, we are going to move the bass up to an A, and what could we do with an A minor? Well, we could do another sus, an A sus, which would be something like that. it's neither major or minor, but what we could also do would be to use our friend, the add 9. So there's A minor, and let's add a 9th. Oh, I just think that is so sad. I could just hold that chord forever. Now, okay, so we've gone. Of course, you could play a cluster. It's still the same essential harmony, but we're just playing slightly different notes. Okay, and then we can go back to F. So how can we do this? Well, we could do this. This is an F sus2, but it's definitely an F because we're playing an F in the bass. And then back to C, just by changing the bass note. So you probably wouldn't want to play them as quickly as that, and you could take your time moving from one chord to another, obviously depending on the sort of music you're making and the sort of effect you want. But that is one way to use different chords, if you like, to create a sense of ambiguity. I hope that put you in the ambiguous, hovering ambient music vibe. And I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own music. The ambient genre has many ways of generating music. This has just been one of them. I hope you found it interesting and useful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. If you did enjoy this and found it useful, perhaps you'd like to consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell. Thank you. I still haven't got tired of doing that. So YouTube will tell you whenever I post a new video. And clicking the big thumb would be a massive help too. Thank you so much for clicking the thumb. If you have enjoyed this video, I think you will also enjoy the videos which have been popping up or will pop up at any moment now. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again very soon in the next one.